Hello, Lisa Brock. Welcome to the Chicago Anti-Apartheid Movement Oral History Project at Columbia College, Chicago. We're going to start with some follow-up questions to your last interview. So, what do you remember about being a part of the 2009-2010 Chicago Anti-Apartheid Movement Oral History Project?
Well, what I remember is it actually started with me because I was the chairperson of the Department of Liberal Education. That's what it was called then, and now it's, I think, Humanities, History, and Social Sciences, and I was the chairperson of that department. And Aaron McCarthy actually taught a course on oral history in my department. And I knew that every year she picked a cohort for her students to interview. And so I asked her if she would be willing to have Chicago Anti-Apartheid Movement folks be the cohort. Initially, it was just supposed to be for one semester, and it ended up being, I think, 3 semesters in order to get everybody. So that was one. The other part was I had approached Heidi Marshall, the archivist here at Columbia College, about taking my materials from my days in the movement and the anti-apartheid movement. And when I approached Heidi about it, she said, "Well, why don't we do this big? Why just your materials?" And so it all started kind of around those coming together of those two aspects. And so we started doing the oral history projects as well as people coming in. We had a huge intake dinner where I invited about 100 people. Reverend Jeremiah Wright from Trinity United Church, who was Obama's minister, he came, and because his church had been a site of anti-apartheid activism. And we had a huge event, and people brought things from their basements and their garages. I'll share one funny story is because I kept all my materials, because for 20, 25 years, this was my major political work. And I knew a lot of people like that here in Chicago who had done the same thing. So I knew they kept their things because it was important to us. And I remember when I wrote them, I wrote a letter, a kind of formal letter, and I said, we'd like you to donate your materials to the Columbia College archives so we can start a collection. And I remember many people like, "Oh, I don't know." And I was like, "I know your children. And when you die, this stuff may not be preserved. It may go in the dumpster. It's important to you, but it's not important to them necessarily. So if you want it to be preserved, you should donate it." And so all of those things came together, and we started this project, of which oral histories were a part.
That's awesome. Um, I'll go with who initially educated you about apartheid?
It was not one person, of course. I was an activist in Washington, D.C. when I was at Howard University around issues of police brutality and anti-racism. I was a member of the um, uh, National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, the DC chapter, and there was anti-apartheid activity happening. So we're talking about 1975, 76, and I was aware of it, and it connected with African independence movements too. And when I came to go to Northwestern University in 1980, I met Dennis Brutus at Northwestern, and he took me to a meeting here around the Springboks, the rugby team coming to Chicago, and that's what got me more involved here in Chicago.
So, what was your role in the Springbok protests?
I was a co-chair of the the Stop the Apartheid Rugby Tour, and it was the summer of 1981. I had just finished 1 year of graduate school. I mean, it was wild because I had just come to Chicago, and I didn't know a whole lot of people. And Dennis takes me to this meeting downtown, and there were other people there. And somehow I left that meeting as a co-chair, and the other two co-chairs worked, and I was a grad student, so I had the summer to really focus on this. And So it was a lot of it got me ensconced in the movement here. I got to meet a lot of people, know a lot of people. We organized. It's a long story. I won't tell you the whole story now. We have it's a lot of, unless you want to after you finish some other questions, maybe we can go back because it was really exciting and moving, and we were connected with the New York group and LA group because they were going to New York, then coming to Chicago, and then going to Los Angeles. And, they kept claiming, oh, it's just sport. We're like, rugby? In 1980, very few people were playing rugby in the United States. And this is the best team in the world from South Africa? Come on, who are you going to play in Chicago? And so it was political. And, they wanted to break the sports boycott because there was a boycott against culture and sport that Dennis was a big part of, Dennis Brutus. I mean, he had been a big part of that sports boycott internationally. And Ronald Reagan was elected, and they made a decision. Ronald Reagan was a friend of the apartheid regime, and they made a decision, this is our time to break that boycott. And so it was a very political gesture, and we responded politically as well. So, yeah, I was a co-chair of that movement.
Why did you change majors from Oberlin College to Howard College, if you did at all?
I don't even know if I had a major at Oberlin. Did you read that I had a major?
No, I didn't. I was just wondering what your major was there.
I'm not sure. I liked music theory. I actually liked music a lot, and I played the piano and the flute. And I thought about composition as a possible major, but I was too much of an activist to be that quiet because it took a lot of quiet practice and a lot of sort of social isolation in some ways to be really good, and concentration. And I was much more outward going, but I always loved history. And so when I got to, even in high school, everybody else would be asleep, and I'd be like, wow, wow, wow. So even the bad teachers I liked. But when I went to Howard University, I majored in history, and I had really great teachers there. And that's why I ended up at Northwestern University to pursue history at a graduate level.
Awesome. What about leadership positions in organizations did you enjoy?
It's a very interesting question. People probably would say that I must enjoy it because I did it. But I didn't do it because I enjoyed it. I did it because for some reason I was good at it. And I think I would just rise to the occasion, and I felt like people trusted me to do it. And it was a kind of skill set I had, and I could contribute to the movement and the struggle with that skill set. So it wasn't that I enjoyed it. I mean, it's a hard work, it's a lot of work. But I did it because it needed to be done. And I guess in some ways I was a natural born leader in that way. I didn't think about it. I just did it. And people seemed to think I was good at it. And so you learn along the way through making errors and mistakes, what's good leadership and what's not. I'm still learning. That's
very interesting. What was it like working at the National Archives while going to school at Howard?
Oh, that was great. Howard was great for that reason because living in D.C., and being in the history department of what people often think of as the best black university in the country, if you wanted a black person, if you wanted a black student intern, you called Howard, right? And I thought about that because when I was at Oberlin, they didn't come to Oberlin looking for black people, so you might get something, but you might not. It just depended. But at Howard, if you were a good student, a star student, they came looking for you, and I felt that. So working at the National Archives was great. I worked in the genealogy section, and I it was actually two of us from the history department. I would say there were three students. We were the three top students in the history department, and we loved history. We hung out together a lot, and that was our thing. We were historians, and the two of them are now lawyers. They became lawyers. But in the genealogy section, very often, probably the most memorable thing were Native Americans, Indians coming to dig up treaties and to dig up various kinds of their legacies and their people. And I remember helping some of them find documents, and that was great. I also decided to look up my grandparents' birth records in this area, and realized that because I grew up with my grandparents in the same neighborhood. I grew up in a small town, so I found three of their birth records, the counties they were born in, and the census data. I guess it was census data. And one I couldn't find. My grandfather I couldn't find. And I was like, he didn't know exactly when he was born, because a lot of times they didn't have access to records born in the South, sharecroppers. And but I looked for like years around when he would have been born and couldn't find him. Went home that Christmas and interviewed all my grandparents. I decided I had to do oral interviews of all my grandparents, and I did each one of them. Learned a lot. I grew up with them, but learned a lot, because you have to ask questions sometimes to get an answer. They're not going to just share. And found out that my grandfather had changed his name when he came to Chicago from Sharkey County, Mississippi, Clarksdale, Mississippi, because he had been in a shootout with some drunk racist who had tried to kill him. And he pulled out a gun and shot back. Luckily, they were drunk. And what they first said to him, he says, is they told him, nigga, dance for us. Dance, nigga, dance. And he said, I'm not. He's like 16. He's like, I'm not dancing. They started shooting at him. And he started running, and they were chasing him. And then he turned around and fired back at one of them with a little pistol he had in his sock. And he thinks he hit one of them, but they didn't hit him. So this is the South. They lynched people, killed people for looking at white people the wrong way. So and these kind of incidents led to a lot of people fleeing. If you've read the what's the Isabel Wilkerson, The Warmth of Other Suns. There's a lot of stories like this. But he ran back to where he was living. He was living with a white man who had given him a room in his garage, because my grandfather had left the sharecropping plantation, he says, when he was 12, because he was hungry. And he left and went to the city on his own at 12, if you can imagine, and met this man and was living up in his garage. And the man, he worked for the man, and he told the man what happened. And the man said, boy, you got to get out of here. They're going to lynch you. And he gave him some money and put him on a train, and he got off here in Chicago. I learned all that because I was working at the archives, because I was decided to look up my own family, and then decided to do my own oral history of my family. So I know. So working at the archives was very impactful for me.
Yeah, that's great. I'm glad you got to know your grandparents a little bit more. Yeah. How did you feel about anti-apartheid organizations that weren't integrated or refused white participation?
That's a good question. I understand that, just like with women's organizations, or with trans or gay organizations, that sometimes you need organizations to be only those people, because you can do things in a certain way without being distracted. So I believe in the formation of all Black or all Indian or all Latino or all gay or all trans organizations when necessary. I did not think the anti apartheid movement was one of those. I thought that we needed every single person we could get in the struggle against apartheid. And so I did not agree with that in this particular movement. And actually don't agree with it in most big movements because I feel if we're going to change the world, you actually change the world through movements. So you can't expect people to understand things if they hadn't been involved in the creation of those things. So if you want to create an anti-racist movement, you have to have white people in it as well. Not all the time. Sometimes people need pressure from an organization like Black Lives Matter, right? Sometimes that pressure jolts people into, oh, I better learn something. I better get involved. But other times, and maybe simultaneously, you need organizations with all kinds of people in it because you're going to learn how to work together as you're moving towards something. Because it's harder if you win something and people have not been involved, right? So the South African struggle was multiracial. They had made a decision very early that they were going to be an organization of everybody in South Africa. Of course, it was majority Black, but they had, Indians, Indian South Africans, white South Africans, Black South Africans, and those who had a heritage of mixed race, who were called colored at the time in South Africa. So they were all involved in the same struggle to end apartheid. So I didn't think it was very useful or fruitful to have an all-Black organization internationally in the struggle against apartheid.
Thank you. That was really insightful. Moving on to life and activism since last time. How was it starting your time at Kalamazoo College?
Kalamazoo College was both tricky. It's a small college in a smaller city, and I was invited there to be the academic director of a brand new endowed center. So I was new, it was new, and the college was pretty tightly closed. And not everybody at the college wanted the center because it was different. Because our vision and our mission was to both work within the college and to work in the world. And it had a $25 million endowment to do it with, which is why I went. I was like, whoa, I can be leader of a social justice center and I don't have to raise money? Ooh, we're going to have us some fun. We're going to have us some fun. And it was fun. It was. We did a lot of great work there. We brought people from all over the world, both to introduce them to our campus, but also to introduce them to each other and the best ideas out here for movement activism. So we had international conferences every other year while I was there before the pandemic. So we had what was called a Without Borders conferences, and we brought people from Palestine and the Solomon Islands, people doing environmental work, Brazil, Africa, Uganda, Kenya, South Africa. It was just fascinating, and they loved it because they got to literally spend time with each other, and basically it was like a laboratory for them and for us to learn best practices. What are people doing in the world around social justice activism? Then we also had a social justice prize for 2 years. And we did this initially because the president of the college who got this endowment, she hired me. I was academic director, and then there was an executive director. And so we had a co-leadership model. Mine was mainly to work with academics and to try to introduce social justice into the curriculum and liberal arts more broadly. And by broadly, I mean going to conferences, inviting academics who are doing social justice work within their research, within their writing, and then also and within their disciplines. And then the executive director's role was more community. So to work with the local community, the national community, the global community. And so we were cooking, and they hired us because one of the questions they asked us when they hired us was, who do you know? Who do you know? Who can you bring here? They wanted to know who we knew. So they brought national people there. So I was seen as a national person who knew Angela Davis and Bell Hooks and people like that, and because I had worked with them, and so I told them who I knew, so that helped me get the job because the goal was we don't want to wait 5 years for this to be big. It's got to be big now. So when we had the Social Justice Leadership Prizes, we did that to get known in the world, and also to bring people to us that we could know, right? So what we did is we had a $25,000 prize. And with social media, we advertised all over the world. And so people applied. The very first year we did it, we had 188 applications. And the goal was we were going to bring the 10 best, the ones we wanted, to campus. And it was a great opportunity because we also had the campus. Because one of the things we tried to do is not just to think of social justice as something that's a goal. It's also something you practice. So collective decision making was something we practiced. So one of the things we did is that we would invite the entire faculty, staff, and students who wanted to participate. We would give them 10 applications, and the applications were videos with subtitles, like TED Talks, because a lot of people couldn't write and write English. I mean, there are people in the Honduras and in Mexico who speak indigenous languages. They don't write them. And so we wanted it to be open. So we thought if we did these little 8-minute videos, they could send in an 8-minute video. So we would take we would give a faculty member, a staff member, a student, 10 8-minute videos, and we give them a rubric. And they would rate them and tell us what they liked and didn't like about them. And then we would take all this data together, the staff at the Arcus Center, and then we would end up bringing 10 people to campus, and they would spend a few days with us. And then we had jurors that would come and make the decision. We didn't make the decision as to who would win the prize. So we've had Medea Benjamin come. She's a international anti-war activist. If you ever watch Congress or C-SPAN and you see a little woman yelling, "No war," that's Medea. She's been nominated for a Nobel Prize. She came one year. Angela Davis came. So and they were jurors. So the restaurant workers won one year, and so it was great. It was just that was great, and it put us on the map for people, and people would be like, that Arcus Center. I mean, the people we met and the people we got to know. One man came for the prize. He was from Bogota, Colombia, and they were a part of a GM workers in Bogota. There's a General Motors plant in Bogota, and the ergonomics in the facility are so bad that people can only work 2 or 3 years, and when they leave, their back is out of whack, their hips are out of whack. This man came. He was only 30. He's on a cane. And they just when you can't work anymore, they just kick you out. No compensation or anything. And they had been protesting in front of the U.S. Embassy in Bogota for years. And do you know what they did? I kid you not. This is just one example of what's happening in the world. They had a tent city out in front of the U.S. Embassy, and they sewed their lips together with needle and thread to protest. And this gentleman came to our center. Wow. And then the UAW auto workers, rank and file, not the leadership, from Detroit, and GM workers from Detroit, Oregon, and somewhere else, maybe South Carolina, came to greet him, to meet him, to be with him, because they knew what was going on. And as workers, they wanted to show solidarity. And so those are the kind of people we met. So working at Arcus was very, very important and moving for me. And now the administrative stuff, the backlash, not so much. We had Patrice Cullors, one of the Black Lives Matters founders. She was one of her organization in LA before Black Lives Matter was one of our finalists. So we saw her early. That was the other thing. Part of what we did was developmental. And she thanks us for helping her develop. So yeah, it was great. It was great. It was great.
What was some of the backlash you received?
Oh, Lord. Well, of course, whenever you deal with the Palestinian question, you're going to have some small Jewish lady from outside of Detroit call you up. Or we had a die-in. Oh, and they wouldn't just call me. They would call the president of the college. What are you doing? How come you're bringing Palestinians? What about the other side, the Israeli side? And we had a panel called Critical Solidarities of Our Time. And one of them was with around Palestine. And so then the president would call me, or call the provost, and the provost would call me because I reported to the provost. So he said, well, Lisa, what's going on? Because we didn't ask permission. We were working, And we had autonomy, which was great. I love that. I would say we're doing a panel of critical solidarities of our time. The Palestinian question is a critical solidarity of our time. That's it. And he says, well, this woman says you were rude to her. I said, I don't even know who she is. I mean, how dare some woman from nowhere call me up and expect me to explain myself to her? Who is she? How is she connected to the so I just asked her, who are you? Why are you calling me? And, she thought she had some right to call me and expect me to do something. I don't know. And usually that would be enough for the provost. I would just answer that. Or one time we got a call and this young woman, because Patrice came and spent a semester, so she came as a finalist for the prize. And we had invited her back for a quarter to be a visiting activist in residence. We had all kinds of programs too, not just the big things. We had regional activists things. We had money. We could help people too, do their work. So she came for a quarter, and while she was there, the whole Ferguson thing blew up. 2014, Mike Brown. And some of our students went, and she went, but they didn't necessarily go together. But the college was so concerned. How could these students, what does it have to do with these students? Why are they going to Ferguson? It's like these black students didn't just drop out of nowhere in the college. So we got a lot of calls about that. Like, why are you sending? I said, they didn't ask permission. They didn't ask us. I said, but we were like seen as the, and then the dean of students at the time got a call from a parent that said that Patrice had brainwashed her daughter into believing she was black. This was a black girl, but she had a white mother. And she was biracial. And she had come to college, and all of a sudden she's discovering herself. So the dean of students, so my response is, this is the era of developmental stage for young people. You know that. Students come here and discover themselves. I said, Georgie has come here and discovered that she's black. She is black. Now, I'm sorry. I don't know if her mother wants to, But they had the nerve to call us about it. That was my thing. I'm like...
Seems like a personal problem.
But see, it shows you the kind of racism that was kind of embedded in the college as well.
That is just insane.
So yeah, there was a lot of different kinds of... or when we did a die-in downtown, we decided nobody in Kalamazoo, the city, had done a die-in. You remember, you may be too young, but after Mike Brown, there were a lot of die-ins where people just laid out in the middle of the street because the police let him lay out and bleed out for 4 hours in the middle of the street in his own community. I don't know where you're from, but the people who saw you grew up, they were incensed, and the police had guns on them. They wouldn't let him help him. And so it was on video. People were videotaped it and put it up on the internet. So we said, okay, Kalamazoo got to do a die-in. So we took charge and we coordinated one. Get a call from the provost. The provost says, Lisa, I got a call from the police. The police say there's word on the street that you all are planning a die-in. I said, yeah, we are. And he said, well, the police wants to know where, when, what to talk to you. I said, okay, give me his number. So I called the police chief. And I said, hello, it's Lisa Brock, Arcus Center. And he says, yeah, I hear you all are planning. So I said, yeah, we are, for this Friday. During art, they have an art hop where the whole downtown, there's an nice art corridor. And downtown, that street is open to 10, the first Friday of every month, all the little shops. And that's where we were going to do it at that night. So he said, well, what are you going to do? So I said, well, there's 2 jails. We're going to meet at both jails, 2 different. I'm going to be one, the executive director is going to lead the other, and we're going to meet downtown at the courthouse. We're going to have some speeches. Then we're going to walk over to the mall, the art mall, and we're going to lay down, do a die-in. He said, you can't do that. I said, we're going to do it. And he said, well, you can't block off streets, I said, well, what do you suggest? And he said, you can't do it. I said, okay, I tell you, I'll give you a compromise. We'll walk on the sidewalks to the courthouse, but we're going to be in the middle of the street at the art mall. He said, well, cars go down there. You can't do that. I said, we're going to do it. And so I said, basically, what are you going to do? And he said, well, I don't know. I'll call you back. So he did not call me back, but when we got to the mall, they had blocked off the street. And so we did do our die-in. And the mayor, I was standing right next to the mayor of the city, Bobby Hopewell. Kalamazoo's a small city, so you get to know the leadership. I said, Bobby, you're gonna drop? He's black, gay black mayor. I said, Bobby, you gonna drop with us? He said, I wish I could. So that was really cool. So yeah, we caused a lot of trouble. We sent people to where was the place in South Dakota, the Pine Ridge, where they were fighting for water and land rights against the pipeline. I can't think of the name right now. But anyway, we sent people there. So yeah. So Arcus was great. I'm long-winded, I know, I'm sorry.
No, that's perfect for that. How has retirement affected your activism? Are you retired?
I'm jubilada. I learned jubilada when in a recent visit to Cuba, because I do research on Africa and Cuba, and I was there in June of 22. Last June, I was there, and I was there for a conference, and I was presenting at an academic conference, and I was telling them, everybody, people, my friends, everyone, how you doing, Lisa? And I'd say, I'm retired. And they say, no, you're not. I said, yes, I am. They said, no, you're not. I mean, this happened more than once, and I was so confused. So I said, okay, if I'm not retired, what am I? And they said, you're jubilada. Jubilada is a conjugation of jubilated, and it means that you are retired but still active. So you must be happy because you don't have to go to work every day, but you're still active. So it has its own meaning. And I realize most people in Latin America, or most people that speak Spanish, know that term. I just didn't know it. But I've stayed active, and part of it has been, once the George Floyd situation happened in summer of 2020, I started getting calls about doing work with people. People wanted work. They wanted me to help them understand what's going on. And so I'm basically a contractor now. I'm a consultant for various organizations. I've consulted with businesses. I did Zooms. I did a thing for the Department of Agriculture the other day because the Black Caucus in the Department of Agriculture saw something that I did on the internet and called me up for Black History Month. Or my first big contract, interesting, was with Big B Coffee, which is a coffee company in Michigan. And the two owners or CEOs called me. One of them went to Kalamazoo. He's an alum, and he had seen what we had done with Arcus. And so he called me up, and he said, we just two white rich. He said, we just two rich white guys, and we need to know what's going on. Can you help us? I was like, okay. Do you pay? Yeah. So I worked with them for about a year and a half, and their senior staff. My latest kind of ongoing contracts have been with the University of Wisconsin. They have a faculty study or faculty retreat every year called Faculty College. And for 2 years, I've gone up and I've facilitated how to integrate social justice into your teaching, learning, research. And so I've done that with them. And I'm currently working with, for 3 years, with the Association for the Study of African American Life and History and Howard University. Jointly, they got a Mellon grant to bring more social justice into their practice. And so this is the 3rd year of the contract I've been working with them. And just so you know, we are on our way to Florida because the conference this year is in Jacksonville. And of course, once I knew that, I was like, you want a social justice analysis of going to Florida? And I said, don't go. We got to boycott Florida. I mean, don't give them any money. And they said, like a lot of conferences, we can't do that because these organizations, they pay for conferences 5 years ahead of time. They're like 4 or 5 years out. So they didn't want to lose the money at the hotel and all that. So I said, okay, if we go to Florida, it has to be a protest conference. We have to, So there are a lot of panels and discussions on Black resistance. They're doing a community forum the day before with local folks. And I proposed that we have to do something public, like a public protest. So we're going to they agreed finally. They were a little nervous at first, but the conference nothing's going to happen for 2 hours on the Thursday, 5 to 7 of the conference. And we are going to march out of the hotel. And I'm working with people from all over the state of Florida, the Dream Defenders, gay organizations, those students from the high schools. And there's a lot of activism going on down there, but our media is not covering it. It's not covering it. I mean, there's been sit-ins at the State House and arrests and all kinds of stuff. And so faculty members I'm in touch with, University of Florida. And so they're part of this. And so they're going to meet us. So we're going to march from the hotel to a park named after James Weldon Johnson. I'm not sure if you know who he is, but he wrote the lyrics for Lift Every Voice and Sing. And we're sitting in the Center for Black Music Research, and Lift Every Voice and Sing is the song that is often considered the Black national anthem in the United States. And so James Weldon Johnson's from Jacksonville, and it's a park named after him. So we're going to march to his park, and we're going to have speakers, and we're going to have whatever, and we're going to read very loudly from banned books. Yes, we're going to read from banned books. And so that's the protest, and we're hoping we can get some media there, because it's likely going to be 1,000 people there. I'm the lead coordinator of that. So that's what I'm doing right now. So retirement's been good because I can choose to do it or not. I don't have to go to work. So no meetings. That's like the worst part of work. It's meetings. But meetings that seem useless, not meetings that you're doing something, but it's just checking a box. So retirement's been great.
I want to kind of go back to your work with other colleges that you haven't necessarily been faculty at, but the contracts you had, what have been some responses from faculty after being told that they have to include all the social justice in their curriculums? Like, has it been mainly positive?
Well, first of all, they don't have to do anything, of course. It's all based on if they want to. And so it's interesting you say that because, I know a lot of faculty and I have former students who are now deans and, I mean, they're running stuff, so they often will invite me sometimes to do things. So I had one friend, and I'm not going to name the place. She's no longer there anymore. She's a dean somewhere else now. But she used to work here at Columbia College with me, and she invited me to work with the biology division of her big state university, and this was when we were still doing Zoom, and because the students had complained about microaggressions and biases and sexism and just a lot of things in that science area. And I met with them on Zoom, and you could see all their faces. Maybe two people of color, maybe two women. There's a lot of them. And most of them had scowls on their face. They were frowning, So I told my friend, I said, you know what? I'm not going to work with them. I don't have to. I don't want to. I'm retired. I don't want to work with people who don't want to work with me. And so that I canceled that contract. And she was a friend. She was okay. She said, what am I going to tell him? I said, I don't know. Maybe tell him I got busy. I don't know. But I was like, and so the chair of the department, who had been very nice, he said, oh, what happened? I was like, I said, I'm sorry, but I just can't do it. But it was the ugly faces. I was like, I don't have to look. Sometimes when you work and you have to look at ugly faces. And you have to deal with people who often, in this world, in this country, I've dealt with racists, I've dealt with sexists, I've dealt with homophobes. I was like, you know what? I'm retired. I don't have to do that anymore. So that's one I canceled. But then so I only work with people who really want to work with me. I'm not doing that. And so the folks at University of Wisconsin have just been great. I mean, they invited me back for a second year. And these are all their teaching and learning centers at all the 13 campuses. And so now what's happened, this second year, there was a core from last year that actually did a lot of preparatory work too. And I've been invited to different campuses because of that work. So someone from a campus that was at the faculty college then invited me to their campus. And in Wisconsin, that's another story, because some of them these are rural campuses. Some of them, they're really struggling. Some faculty of color in some of these places. But no, I mean, I've made a decision. I only work with people who want to learn and do this work. I feel like I'm a kind of person that's very open, and most of the faculty in Wisconsin, of course, are white. Most of them are white, but they get it. They get it. They're smart. They want to do this work. They asked me some difficult questions and some interesting personal questions, not personal, but questions that they've had. So when I go to faculty college in Wisconsin, it's really nice. It's 3 days. It's at a resort. I'm hanging with them. It's like 100 and some faculty. I'm hanging with them the whole time. So we're like eating together. We're swimming together. We're having a drink together. And so they will ask me questions, or they'll ask, can I meet with you quietly to talk to you? So it's not just me presenting. I'm also kind of helping them. And so I'll give you one example that was so interesting. One art historian asked me, she was confused because she had presented a bunch of images, historic images, in a class. And she had, I don't know if you've ever seen this image, but there's an image of the best way to transport captives. There's actually an image of the ship. and they're all laid down like in a very neatly in a row, right? And that's a classic image. It was kind of a prototype for transportation of the slave ship. And she showed that picture and talked about it. And there was a black student in the class that got angry about it and got up and left. So she wanted to know why that student, this is a white professor, why that student got up and left. Because she thought she was integrating, she was trying to bring in the issue of enslavement into her class so that they could talk about it. And she talked about it in a way, I don't think it was off-putting or anything, the way she talked about it. And see, one of my strategies of introducing or one of my strategies for teaching with a social justice lens, that's kind of the way I say it, is that if you're going to talk about oppression, you have to talk about resistance. I said, did you have an image of the Haitian Revolution when, the resistance there? Or did you have an image of Amistad, a revolt or something like that? And she said, no. I said, that's what you have to have. I said, because nobody wants to be a victim. People don't like that. It hurts. People don't want to talk about that. But resistance, now you can talk about that if you're going to talk about how people fought back. That empowers people. And so that's one of my strategies. Because I give them a bunch of strategies, and that's one of them. I said, if you're going to talk about oppression, you have to talk about resistance. So she said, wow. I said, there's so many images of the Haitian Revolution kicking the French's butt. I said, use one of those images. And they're classic paintings and stuff. Use one of those images. And so she said, okay. And I said, then you can talk about the Haitian Revolution, which was a very important moment in Black history. So those kind of things happened there. Or I talked about the Palestinian question, and I had a Palestinian woman come up. I just mentioned stuff in passing. I don't, because I'm talking about my strategies, but sometimes I'll weave things in. And a Palestinian woman came up very quietly. And she said, thank you, thank you, thank you. Nobody ever mentions us because they're afraid. And then a young Jewish woman came up and said, I want to talk to you about that because I'm struggling, because I came from a strong Jewish family. I've been to Israel. They're all Israel supporters. And I'm struggling with how to balance the Palestinian question with my family, who are pretty Zionist. And so I said, let's talk. So we talked. So I like that kind of engagement, and I think they do too. So, yeah, so that's what I've been doing. Those are some of the things I've been doing.
Just a little.
Just a little.
Nothing too impressive.
Well, I don't know. It's fun. I like that. I like teaching. I love teaching. And so this is a way that I can still teach.
It's amazing. It's literally so amazing. Hearing everything.
It's a way I can still teach it. I really, and I can now with this organization, I can still be an activist, planning a demonstration.
Do you ever go to sleep?
Of course. Well, these, again, with contracts, I only have 2. I had one. It's over with Wisconsin. I'm just working on this one now. It'll be over in September. I hope I get more. I don't know. I'm on Social Security and my TIA CREF, which ain't a lot of money. So these contracts kind of help.
All right. Let's talk about the next thing. How did you react to Nelson Mandela's death in 2013?
I saw that question. I wrote an article. I published an article. And it was called something like "The World is Not Flat," because the way he's remembered is similar to King. The way he's remembered has been flattened out. People say, "Oh, he changed the country without violence." Apartheid was violent. What they're talking about, see, these little subtle white supremacist comments. What they mean is white people didn't die in the struggle. Thousands Thousands of people were tortured and killed in South Africa in that long struggle. It was not officially a war, but it was violent, the state violence. They even killed people outside of South Africa. So when Mandela died, I did a couple interviews on Kalamazoo TV, and then I wrote this article about it kind of critiqued the analysis of Nelson Mandela's life that I was hearing. That was one. But when I saw that question, when you sent the questions, I think the question should be, what did we do when he was released? When he was released from prison, I mean, you're talking about a party. Oh, Lord, all over the world. Because, we're fighting to end apartheid. We're fighting for his release, but we don't know if it's going to happen. We don't know. You fight because it's right. You think it can happen. You do it because it's right, and then it happens. I was teaching at Lake Forest at the time, in 1990, actually. And it was my first full-time teaching job. And I told the students up there, if Mandela ever gets released, you find me, I will have champagne. Sure enough, when he got released, the next day I went to campus with bottles of champagne, 9 in the morning, we're drinking champagne with my students, everybody. Everybody was coming to my office because, I was the one who taught that. I taught courses. I've always taught a course on South Africa. So, and then the other thing is, we were hoping he was as great as we said he was. You see, because no word from Mandela for years, for 28 years. It was illegal to print in South Africa. It was illegal to print anything he said. Nobody could see him. Nobody could hear him. Nobody knew what was going on in prison. Nothing. And we're like, God, please let him be as wonderful as we've made him out to be. And after 28 years, you don't know. He could come out. He could be, prison's tough. He could be in trouble mentally, We just didn't know. And then when he was as wonderful as we thought, oh my God, we were like in heaven. We danced in front of the South African embassy here in Chicago, the consulate here in Chicago. We danced. And we had parties all over the city, different apartments, different people had parties. I had a party. And he was supposed to get out. The time he was supposed to get out, it was the middle of the night here. So people were up. We had the TV on. People were up watching. And I got calls. I got a call from London and a call from Lisbon. And I called somebody in Sweden because when I traveled around, and the movement was international, so you met people. I knew everybody was we were all at that moment, at the same place and time, watching this event all over the world, activists. Because, there were anti-apartheid movements in almost every major city, from Tokyo to Stockholm, Brussels, all the African cities. I mean, it was truly an international struggle. And there were people, when I traveled to London, Lisbon, and Mozambique, all I had to do was look for the anti-apartheid office and find my people. They were there. So I would say more is what did we do when he was released and how did we feel? I mean, we were ecstatic, just ecstatic.
Awesome, thank you. All right, now we'll move into talking about some current events.
Okay.
What was your reaction to the 1619 Project by Nicole Hannah-Jones?
Oh, it's great. It's wonderful. I mean, what's been happening lately, and now we've got this fascist backlash. It's a fascist backlash. I'm going to call it what it is the country has been moving slowly, but in a direction of being multi-centered in its history and much more geared towards a social justice analysis of the past, right? So some of the monuments and honoring and all of that of the past of the United States is actually an insult to a lot of Black people and other people of color. And so how do you wrestle with that? And I think the 1619 Project was one way to say, well, you say history started this moment. Let's think about the 1619 as the starting point of another kind of American history. You could also start it with Native Americans. You could start it with Asians coming to Angel Island in California. So I like the idea of multiple narratives. And these narratives are centering the struggle for justice, right? And as opposed to a kind of uplift of certain people at the expense of others. I've often said that, Italians and Welsh and Scottish and Irish and British came here and became white. You had the Yoruba and the Hausa and the people from the Congo and Angola, and they came here and became black. And that construction has meant a whole lot in this country and in the world because of the colonialism as well. And I think to only teach about the construction of whiteness without saying it has been the way most of the history has been taught here. And I think over the years, there's been a challenge to that. And so, of course, you've got a backlash. And of course, 1619 is one of those books that is banned in some states now. But one of the things that's so interesting is, only a few people can cause a whole bunch of books to be banned. It's not a majority. It's not a majority. That's what we have to keep in mind. DeSantis does not represent a majority. That Abbott in Texas does not represent a majority. If we listen to the media, they represent power, but not a majority of people. And so I think we just have to keep our eyes on the prize and understand that. And I think over the last few years, so what's happened is my teaching, people like me teaching, all of this, all these young people are out here now, like we ain't going back. And that's everybody. That's not just black people. We're not going backwards. And so I think we just got to keep pushing as hard as we can to keep books like 1619 in circulation.
Awesome. Let's talk about your opinion on the significance of the results of the U.S. 2016 presidential election.
Oh, I'm of a generation. When Ronald Reagan was elected, we said he was too dumb, and it happened. Then George Bush II, George Bush 1 wasn't that dumb. George Bush II, C student who got into Yale because his dad went to Yale. They don't talk about that legacy affirmative action, right? Money affirmative action. I thought that couldn't happen. He's too dumb. And then 2016, we get this guy, TV hustler, business hustler, a criminal. He doesn't pay. He has never paid his bills. There's like tons of information. When he was doing the stuff out there in New Jersey and Atlantic City, he would hire Polish immigrant workers. They'd have a contract. And then when it was over, he's like, oh, I don't like this building. You didn't do it like I like. I'm not going to pay you. Then they have to take it. This is actually the way he works. This wasn't one instance. So they say, you have to pay us. We have a contract. He say, take me to court. When you go to court, they settle and they get about half of what he promised. It's his business methodology. So Donald Trump is, when he was elected, it was scary, and it proved to be scary because he ends up becoming the signifier for all those people who don't like the social justice movements in this country. He became the person that let them say it's okay to ban books. It's okay to steal, big businesses to steal from people. It's okay to do toxic waste dumps in poor neighborhoods. It's okay to rape women. He gave them license. All those people like that, they start coming out, you know? And if the president can do it, I'll tell you a funny story. I was in Nairobi, Kenya in January 2020, right before the pandemic. We didn't know it was coming. And my husband and I, we had been there on a kind of retreat thing with an organization. And we stayed a couple extra days in a hotel. And in this hotel, there was a shop. And in the shop, with the man running the shop, was a Kenyan of Indian descent. And he was sitting there with a little TV. And he was watching TV. And I said, "Oh, what do you have on?" He said, "It's Indian Independence Day." I said, "Oh, that's nice." And I said, "What do you think of your president, Moti?" Now, Moti, I had heard, had been oppressing and literally rounding up Muslims. You know, he's a Hindu nationalist and attacking Islam and Muslims in the country in a way that had not been done before. And so I said, "Well, what do you think of your president, Moti?" He said, "Oh, I like him." I said, "You like him?" I said, "He's doing horrible things to the Muslims in your country." He said, "Well, if Donald Trump can do it, we can do it too. If the president of the United States can do it." So not only has he had an impact here, like-minded people, dictators, wannabes, fascist wannabes have come up in all these countries now. And white supremacy, I mean, Sweden of all places. I have family in Sweden. You've got a Nazi party that won more in this recent election than ever before. And so you end up with these, so he has led a fascist tilt in the world that's very dangerous. And the sad thing about it is that he is not bright. And so the scary thing is he has his supporters. I think the media gives him more attention than they should. When he was arraigned recently down there in Florida, there was about 50 people out there, but they made it look like it was like a lot of people, Trump supporters. So 2016, I gave a talk after the election, and I used the theory of intersectionality to analyze the election. And what I did was, because when you looked at the data, you saw by race and gender, you saw everybody kept saying 54% of white women voted for Trump. You know, a known sexual predator. How is that possible? 54% of white women voted for Trump. How is that possible? And then you looked at the black community, and the black community, 97, I'm paraphrasing because I don't have the data in front of me, but 97% of black women voted against Trump. But only about 87% of black men voted against Trump. Okay, so what does this data possibly tell us? And how can you use intersectionality to analyze it? So when you think about intersectionality, you know, intersectionality is we all have multiple identities, identity markers. So I'm an African American. I am educated. I am a woman. I am cisgendered. Those are all my markers, right? And I'm not rich, right? Now, for white women, you could say some are rich, some are poor, some are educated, some aren't, but they're all white. They're white, okay. Now, if they had voted gender, they probably would have voted against him, but they used their whiteness. They voted their race. Their racial identity was more important in this election than their gender identity, right? And for black women, I think it was race and gender that got them to vote so much for Hillary and against Trump. For black men, their gender had them lean in a little bit more to Trump. And what's so interesting about these things, especially with black men and with white women, is that people tend to lean into the thing that they feel gives them the most power. So for Black men, being men in their minds gives them more power in some ways in this election than being Black. Because being Black, you're just Black. Being a man. And for white women, being white gives you a little more power than being a white woman. And so we kind of played around with that. I gave a talk in a workshop and had people think about these things with the election. So I've often responded to these events, either writing or speaking.
Yeah. I really like that idea of the intersectionality.
Isn't it interesting?
Yeah, it just makes a lot more sense. Cheryl was talking about it too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you think the approach to anti-racism in the United States has changed since the death of George Floyd in 2020?
I don't think it's just George Floyd. I mean, when you think about it, actually Patrice and Opal and Alicia, the three women that founded the moniker Black Lives Matter, they started after Trayvon Martin was killed in 2012. And so I think there's been a build-up over time. And what we had with Mike Brown, so you have Trayvon in 2012, you have Mike Brown in 2014, and then you have George Floyd in 2020, and then of course all the thousands in between. Let's be realistic. There's a lot of people killed every year by cops, and so I think the fact that Mike Brown and George Floyd were, you could see it nowadays, meant that everybody in the country and the world could see him being killed. It's like live TV. You know, it's like murder porn or something. It's horrible. And so I think that catalyst made people think, because they could see it, this is crazy. This is crazy. And that young girl that stood there to film it, you know, she's traumatized. When she went to court for those cops, she's not well because she knew her historic purpose at that moment. Think about that. She's seeing it in live time, and she said, "I'm gonna capture this." She's like 17. So back to your question, I think that it was a catalyst for a lot of people who had not thought about it before, like the Big B Coffee people calling me, right? And a lot of institutions putting in diversity programs. You know, they had started that before, but they began to put them in. Of course, part of the challenge with that is a lot of them don't work because a lot of people don't want to hear the truth. And I wrote an article about that too, about there's a guy at University of Pennsylvania who runs a diversity equity center, and he gets hired. I don't know where he is now. His name is Harper, last name Harper. He was being hired by a lot of DEI, by a lot of universities to come in and do an analysis and then make a recommendation. He wrote an article, "Stop paying me $25,000 to do nothing." He wrote an article because he said he goes in, he does focus groups, he gives them the truth, and they say, "Can't you just change a little bit here, change?" So on the one hand, it's led to these DEI programs, which is good. But then even within those liberal sectors, they really don't want to do the work. Because racism is so much a part of our country, it's really difficult for a lot of people to not be racist in this country. You have to work. You know, Beverly Tatum says it's like you're born on a treadmill. You're born on it, it's just running whether you want it to or not. And you can end up, you know, just on it all your life unless you decide to step off and become an anti-racist, right? And so I think there's been a lot of movement since George Floyd, and we have to keep going because the other side is coming after us right now, and Trump represents the other side, and not him personally, but his ilk represents the other side, and so I just think we have to keep working, and there will be another George Floyd. there will be another eruption. We just don't know when or what the context will be.
One more Trump question. How did you react to the January 6th storming of the Capitol?
You don't want me to curse on my interview, do you?
Oh, go ahead.
I was like, I'm not going to do it though. I'm sensitive to history, but I was like, look at those fools. I mean, and I knew who was behind it. I knew the Trump folks were behind it. The lie that he lost the election. He's such a liar. Everything bad. Liar, rapist, doesn't pay his bills, just everything he represents, He'll support anybody that supports him. It was a pedophile. That pedophile guy that was a senator, he supported him from Alabama, I think it was. I can't remember. But
you said pedophile senator. I'm like, which one?
Yeah, which one? And it's such a, you know what it is too? They have no shame. He represents a kind of narcissism that is shameless. And at least we used to have the element of shame to use. People would be, you remember back in the day, if a presidential candidate was caught having an affair outside of his marriage, that caused him to drop out of the election. Not anymore. Mm-mm. And that's lightweight. I mean, at least that's consensual. It's like, oh my God. So I think when that happened, it was frightening, scary. And I knew that the Trump forces were behind it. And some of those policemen from DC, and the fact that they did not call out the National Guard to stop them. Can you imagine if those had been Black people or Native Americans? They would have been gunned down. Literally gunned down. And the fact that that didn't happen was a clear sign that there was a big conspiracy involved in this. So that's all I can say about that. Yeah.
And now, after that, we'll talk about some reflections. We talked a little bit about intersectionalism. So how did being a Black woman affect your activism?
Everything. It's everything. Yeah. I was both a girl and Black in the United States coming up. And so I was very aware of injustices along both lines as a girl. Although I wouldn't call, I didn't kind of come into my feminism as a kind of real concept, thinking about intersectionality, right? I didn't come into it as my sense of being a feminist until, in terms of claiming it, and later than being a Black woman. So it affected everything, really. I mean, it's hard to think of myself in any other way, really. It just is and was. I don't know how to,
Did you ever have people kind of who were either other women or other people of color who kind of found conflict with you because of these things? Were they conflicting at all during your time?
Oh, yeah. I mean, also, especially as a girl, you're supposed to act a certain way, you're supposed to dress a certain way, you're supposed to do this or do that, and I've never fit that category, even as a girl. It's funny, I tell the story. When I was I think it's probably in my other interview, when I was in junior high school and we were organizing for girls to wear pants. We had to wear dresses in 1968, 69, 70. We had to. And so I was, the women's movement was happening kind of in the ether. And so was the civil rights movement and Black Panthers and all that. And I was young, but I was aware of it. And somehow I got in my mind that we should wear pants. So we got me and other girls, we got together. We seventh grade, and we just started wearing pants to protest, and then we'd get expelled. Or they'd kick us out. And my mother and father weren't having me being expelled. Basically, my parents supported me. They weren't raging activists, but they actually thought what we were doing made sense to them. My mother basically told them that I couldn't be expelled because she works. She said she can't be at home by herself. She's got to be here in school. So if you want her to sit somewhere in the office, she's not going home. So anyway, we won that, So, and there were people who didn't support it, of course, and boys and teachers, and they generally didn't like the agitation. That was the main thing. They wanted you to just go along. And when you don't go along, that's what they get mad about. Not some of it was the issue, some of it was the agitation. And the story I was going to say, my dad was a teacher. He was the first black teacher at this school district we were in. And we were a minority until they fused with a largely black school district some years later. But he was teaching in the high school. And before I came to the high school, because we had a middle school 7th, 8th, and 9th, and then we went to the high school at 10th grade. And when I went to the school, he got another job, and he was working at a different school. And the joke was he left because I was coming. I had always heard that, and I thought it was because he was embarrassed. He would be embarrassed because I was kind of an agitator already. And I asked him later, when he got older, and I said, "Daddy, you remember when you left Princeton and went to Hughes High School, and you left because of me?" He said, "Yeah, really, he said, I got a better job." I said, "Yeah, I do know you got a better job, so it wasn't just because of me." He said, "But also, you already had a reputation as an agitator, and I thought that somebody would say something bad about you, and I'd defend you. I might have to punch him, and then I'd lose my job." So I said, "Oh, Daddy," I was really, it was really sweet. So it wasn't that he was embarrassed; it's that he didn't want people talking about me. He was proud. He was actually, he was proud of me. I think my parents were proud of me. So, but not everybody in the communities, and so yeah, I remember here in Chicago when we were running the Springboks thing, and we had a multiracial committee, and there was a group was formed on the South Side that was all black, led by Comrade Worrell, and Comrade Worrell and I had never really met, and one day we met downtown here, and he was very tall, and I'm looking up to him, and he said, "Oh, you're Lisa Brock. You're running the white group." And I said, "Do I look white?" And he said, walked away. So there are men who don't want or respect women's leadership. I mean, in all races, of course. And the same thing recently with Black Lives Matter. There were a lot of tension between older black male activists and young queer black women. And I mean, it makes perfect sense that queer black women would be in the leadership, because one of the things we say in social justice is the most oppressed will lead, because they know what it means to be in the crosshairs of all kinds of oppressions. And so, but I've seen it for myself and argued with some of the older folks that I've known. They're like, "Why is this thing being run?" I'm like, "Why not? Why not? What's it got to do with you anyway? These are brilliant young people. Let's follow them. Your time's over." That's what I'm like with these old guys. I'm like, get out the way.
How has activism affected your marriage?
It's the glue. It's really the glue. Me and Otis, I'm married to Otis Cunningham. So, I mean, it's what brought us together, and it's probably what keeps us together after 30 some years, reading and talking about politics, and you know. So it's been good. It's important, I think, to marry somebody that's like minded and in practice. I used to, in those rare moments when young women would ask me my advice on relationships, I would say, I'm not an expert. I'm not Dr. Ruth or anybody. But I used to think, in fact, I do a little Venn diagram, and they've taken pictures when I put it, because sometimes they'd be talking, when I go into class, they'd be talking about relationships, and they say, well, Dr. Brock or Lisa, what do you think? So, but I used to think that it was two circles that overlapped. And you all are both individuals, and you meet. A Venn diagram with two circles, and that middle part is where you all are together. That's the common interest. And I don't believe that anymore. I believe it's two separate circles, and the two nuclei of those circles are what connects you. So you have to have a similar orientation in life. It's not personality, because Otis is much quieter than me in some instances, not when he's home, but most people think he's quieter. And but we bond because we both know it's important to be involved in struggle, and it's who we are. And it's so interesting because when I left Oberlin and went to Washington, D.C., and within 3 weeks went to a demonstration downtown, and signed a clipboard to join the Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, and then got a call, I was like, this is my tribe. I'm from a small town. I was always kind of like, people knew, oh, that's Lisa, she's going to agitate, that's Lisa. But they weren't of that ilk necessarily, people I grew up with. When I got to D.C. and met people like me who had that fire, you see something that's happening that's unjust, you got to fight to change that. So I was like, oh God, my tribe, I got my tribe. So the movement is my tribe, and the movement is Otis's tribe. And so there's no conflict around that, because it's funny, you date different kinds of people coming up, nice, sweet folks, but they didn't know why I had to go to so many meetings. They didn't know why I got so agitated. Why me? Like, why you? Why are you the one that has to do this? They didn't understand because it wasn't them. So I ultimately knew I couldn't marry somebody who didn't understand that. And I think Otis probably feels the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see. Were there any costs of your involvement in the anti-apartheid movement, and what were they?
Well, I never got fired, but that's pretty good, because often you can be fired because you are doing things that the institutions you work for don't like. So for most of my academic career, I kept the two pretty separate as much as I could, because I was nervous about people knowing who I really was, kind of fighter I was, and a leftist. I'm a leftist. I believe that there are aspects of socialism that we need, and now with my, in my classes, I would teach the way I wanted. I never self-centered. And I always had a student following because they like that. Students, the young people, they want to hear about how to fight the system. At least most of the ones I had. I only had a few who wondered in my class and didn't know what they were getting when they came. But for most of the years, I've had really great students. I will say, though, my very first class, I think I gave this to Heidi as a document, this group called Accuracy in Academia, a right-wing group that monitors progressive and so-called liberal faculty. My very first class at Northwestern, a student there reported me to them because I took the class to the anti-apartheid shanty. And they wrote a newspaper article on me and called the chair of the department. And but the chair, I was a celebrity in the department. It's like I'm doing something worth the right actually challenging. So at that time, we're talking about 1986. They, I didn't even know they had called the chair. He didn't even tell me, And he what he said was he told him if a student has trouble with a teacher or professor, they should just come in. He should just come and talk to me about it. There are processes with which you can do that, And I'm not talking to you a national organization on K Street in Washington D.C. So that happened once. I mean, it's happened before in movement stuff where I've been outed of a sort, but it hasn't been a lot of cost. I have friends who've lost jobs. My friend Dr. Linda Murray, who's a progressive medical doctor, who tried to start an all-in union along with Otis when they worked at Cook County Hospital in the 70s. By all in, they mean doctors down to janitors, all in the same union. Can you imagine? And this was a national movement at the time. Hospital workers, they were called. And she got fired and could not get a job. As a medical doctor, she could not get a job anywhere in the U.S. So she went to Montreal and lived for a few years until Harold Washington was elected here, and he brought her back and hired her in Chicago. So she's been interviewed, and she's funny. She says, well, you know what? If you only get fired every 10 years, that's a victory if you are a radical activist in this country. So I've always worried about it. I've left jobs, this job, because I did not get along with the dean that took Cheryl's job. And because a lot of people of color under that leadership were being demoted and were leaving. Latina, Asian, Black. She's no longer dean, but I was like I'm not gonna let her demote me. So, because I had tenure, so when you got tenure, because I was chair of the department, and for some reason, this person did not like chairs of color. Isn't it something?
That is so crazy.
And the Latina that had been Cheryl's assistant was so fed up. The Asian woman that Cheryl had hired as a I don't know if Cheryl had hired him. Cheryl Johnson Odom, but she had come in as a communication specialist. She was like, she got fired. Part of it was the ethnic jokes. Yeah, part of it was the ethnic jokes. And if you didn't laugh, then you were a problem. And of course, I never laughed, and none of us laughed. We'd be like, so I'll leave it there.
No, we'll talk more about that later, I think. In the previous interview, when discussing Mr. Washington's passing, you believe Chicago never recovered. How do you feel now?
Well, Brandon is hopeful.
Yeah, how do you feel about him?
I'm so excited, and I didn't think it was possible. And on I was just getting ready to have knee surgeries. My knee was really bad, but I worked my block. That's the best I could do. And I live in Beverly neighborhood, which has a lot of cops and firemen. So there were a lot of valor signs around. But on my block, there were 3 valor signs and 3 Brandon signs. And then the rest of the block, there were nothing, which I thought was a positive sign for Beverly because it's a predominantly white block. So all the houses that had no signs, I went and knocked on their door. And I told them I was for Brandon. I mean, I know most of the people on the block. We've been there a long time. And So they said, "Oh, we're not putting out any signs." I said, "You don't have to put a sign." I said, "Just vote for Brandon," and I explained why. And so his vote in our ward went from I think 7% to 26%. And we had a 19th ward organization for Brandon. It was multiracial. It was great. So I think I think it was great. I think it represents in some ways the legacy and is more advanced than Harold could have ever been. And he's got a city council that's with him. You know, those old guys, they were blocking left and right everything Harold tried to do. But that was for us. That was like a moment. Oh, we cried. We were in the streets. Lakeshore Drive, they had to like block it off because so many people were in the streets. But we worked. That election, we worked really hard to bring out the vote. And Obama used that strategy, which was back then, you'd see who's registered. You could get the voter registration for different wards and precincts. And for people who weren't registered to vote, you'd go knock on their doors, especially in the Black community. It was like, Harold will run if you register to vote. Because Harold had said that people wanted him to run. And he said, I can't run unless we get more Black people registered to vote, because I can't win. So we said, how many do you need? He said, 50,000. We got 150,000 registered voters. And then we knocked on doors all over the city. I was at Northwestern at the time, and I went to Rogers Park, church up on Morris Avenue, 500 people on a Sunday morning, all being dispatched to different neighborhoods. We had maps. And then I was a poll watcher on the South Side. And the poll watcher, you'd have a list of all because we had surveyed everybody by knocking on doors or phone. Everybody in that precinct, we had a list of their names on a clipboard. And we had a plus or minus. Plus if they said they were going to vote for Harold, minus if they said they weren't. We would sit right up in the front, and we'd hear when people said their name when they came in. They had to say their name. And we would see them. If they were a plus, we'd check them off. If they were a plus, we'd check them off. And as the day went on, if we still had pluses and those people hadn't come, we had runners. We'd send people to their house, knock on the door. Are you going to vote? You're going to vote today? All the way to voting closed to maximize turnout. I mean, it was a miraculous election because of the work we did. And then we had the math. The math was if 80% of the registered voters Black voters vote for Harold, 50% of the Latinx voters vote for Harold, and 10% of whites vote for Harold, we can win. And so that's what we worked towards. Because we weren't trying to get all the whites to vote for Harold. That wasn't going to happen. That was wasted time. And so it worked. And we had, Rudy Lozano was a big part of that. And he was killed mainly because of the Black Latino solidarity at the time. He was assassinated. So that was a great moment. And Brandon's a great moment too. It's just not, it wasn't technically my moment, in terms of how I felt about it being so involved. I wasn't as involved in Brandon's election. But I'm really happy. And I think there's a lot of potential if we can garner resources, if we can garner resources. So
back to anti-apartheid. What have been the successes of post-apartheid South Africa?
Successes and not successes? And failures. Well, the successes have been that they don't have a political apartheid anymore. They don't have police locking up people and killing people, for their political activities. And that's great. But I was very disappointed that they didn't create more of a mixed economy. I thought that they should have, De Beers diamond mines started in South Africa. It's South African mining. And they're the world diamond leaders, but it was De Beers in South Africa that started the diamond industry. All those people who died in those mines, all that hard ass work. I did curse. Um, I thought they should have made De Beers pay reparations and over time, and maybe 50% of all profits for the next 100 years. I would say 100%, but this is 2020 whatever or 1994. At least 50%, and they didn't do that. For how they could have said 50% for housing. They could have taken the Anglo-American gold mines. Same thing, you know. I remember my friend Albie Sachs came to Chicago, and he was partly raising money for the Constitutional Court they were going to build in South Africa. And I remember saying, I said, Albie, South Africa's a rich country. Why are you here raising money? Just take the money. It's yours. And they basically didn't do that. I know now that they were blackmailed by the U.S. and other Western countries. If you do this, we will sanction you like we did Cuba. But I also don't know if the will. I know Mandela and the negotiating folks were tired as heck, and they may also have just said, we'll fight this battle later. Let's just get this over. Because, those talks took 4 years. Can you imagine poor Mandela? I think it was, who was it? Was it Dick Gregory, the comedian, when Mandela came to the U.S.? He said, here this man has been in jail 28 years. And he comes out, he says, where did I leave off? So Mandela literally gets out of jail and is put at a table to negotiate change. I mean, it's like, whoa. So they were all tired. Some of them at that table had been tortured. Luckily, the Mandela 8 did not get tortured in prison. That's wonderful that didn't happen to them. But a lot of the ones later that were picked up, and they were all tortured. It's terrible. And so they're negotiating, with the apartheid leadership. And they might have at some point just said, let's just do this now and do this later. But what that's led to, when you have capitalism like you got, what they did is they hired certain leaders. The mining companies hired leaders in their companies, and now they're millionaires. And the economics of South Africa, while the political system has changed, the economic system has not changed a whole lot. And especially when you think about neoliberalism in the world. I mean, I mentioned Ronald Reagan and the dumbing down of American presidential leadership. But neoliberalism began with Ronald Reagan in this country, to not tax the rich, individual greed, all that stuff really began. I mean, it's always been there, but it went on steroids at that time. The starving of the public sector, all of that. And so, South Africa comes into being when this is also evolving. And so people just started working in. It's very similar to the civil rights movement here. Black people did not fight to just use the toilets that white people used. I mean, it wasn't that. It wasn't that. It's that we wanted to have access to a toilet when we needed one downtown. I'm talking about segregation. Because I grew up when downtown Cincinnati was segregated. So we'd go downtown, and a little kid got to pee, and my grandmother said, hold it, because you can't go into any place to use the bathroom. So the civil rights movement was about access. It was about resources, right? It was but what we ended up with is we have access, we don't have resources, and we have new types of segregation that are based on class and race, and subtle ways of discrimination, not frontal ways. And I think in South Africa, it's still very similar. I mean, crime has risen, all the kind of things that we have here. And it's because people don't have anything. And then when you lose hope too, you're going to have crime. I mean, it's not rocket science. So successes were apartheid's over. Some people may think successes are having black millionaires. That's not my line of thought. I think you should have a society that has access to everything that the country, resources. So schools, university, all that. Students have been protesting in South Africa. They finally won free education. So the young people post apartheid have been keeping the struggle going. Yeah, I met some of those young people in 2016 when I was there.
And a final question. What challenges remain for not just South Africa, but Chicago as well?
We have to fight to get the money. For everybody. They are the reason there's poverty is because there's hoarding of money. There's a relationship. People act like people are poor because, oh, well, I can't get it together. They can't get it together. They can't. No. We have billionaires, multi-billionaires in this country. And we have people who can't afford health care. That's a crime to me. And I don't care if Bezos made his money on Amazon. He made it from people paying him. And he should give some back. A lot of it. You don't need $1 billion to live. And it's just, so I think, we have to figure out a way to get the money, treat the world. The U.S. treats the world horribly. We're not friendly. I don't know if you've ever been to a U.S. embassy in another country. Do it one day. It's a fortress, and they're not nice people. At least that's been my experience. And also, when Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, all those Central American countries that people are fleeing because of violence and gangs in Haiti, the U.S. has been a part of creating that situation, our government, through helping coups and assassinations and putting in a leadership, because basically the U.S. government operates. They want a leadership in these countries that they can manipulate to get their resources. And if you have someone or a leadership that says no, they send in the gunboats. They've tried it in Venezuela about 3 times. They just had some success in Peru. I'm so happy about Colombia and Francia Marquez, the first black vice president of a Latin American country, who we invited to the Arcus Center in 2012. See, we could see the people coming. And then Brazil went back to Lula. Bolsonaro, the former, these are fascists that they want in place because they don't care what they do to the people. They really don't. They just want the money. And so it's not just here, it's there. So if we could change this country, we could change the world. And we need a revolution here. But it's not, I think we used to think a revolution is, somehow people, everything turns over at once. I don't think that's going to happen here. We're moving to raise the consciousness of Americans about a lot of things. And that's part of what we do as social justice leaders, right? We work with people to try to get them to see the world as it is and want to make change. So you move on the inside, and then you also challenge from the outside. And my hope is that one day the two will meet, and we will not be able to go back. Like we can't go like from an Obama to a Trump. That's my hope, because the country is divided. But I think a majority are moving in the right direction. The minority right now has power. That's why we see more of them on TV and stuff. Gil Scott-Heron had a song back in the 70s that said the revolution will not be televised. And I think we need to keep that in mind, because Brandon, I think one of the reasons Brandon won is because they didn't see us coming. They didn't see us coming because they think, oh, little black school teacher. And then Vallis thought he could actually He got those black leaders to come out, so-called leaders to come out for him. They don't lead anybody. They're just black. So it didn't work. Didn't work. So the people make history, and we're going to make a revolution in this country, one way or another.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.